The last days before the Purge did not come with alarms. They arrived like frost, gradual, silent, inevitable. Mand'alor, once aflame with war cries and banners, now stood under a quiet occupation. Imperial banners did not flap in triumph. They hung still and heavy in air, too calm for comfort. The city of Sundari, half-gleaming, half-cracked, pressed against its glass dome like breath on thin ice. Beneath its surface, the people moved slower, quieter, as if sensing something just out of reach, something pressing against the threads of fate. Peace, as declared by the Empire, was not peace at all. It was the dull hum of control. Stormtroopers patrolled not in legions, but in pairs, confident, comfortable, convinced that resistance was crushed beyond return. The great clans, fractured by years of civil strife, sat in uneasy stillness. The scars from the conflict between Death Watch, the Night Owls, and House Vizsla had not healed. They had only been buried beneath layers of protocol, of silence, of things better left unsaid. Old traditions clung to the stone corridors like dust. Rituals continued, but without song. Foundlings trained without the cries of encouragement. The forges cooled, their flames lit only on rare occasion, more for memory than need. Elders passed down the creed in whispers, glancing over their shoulders as though the words themselves might draw unwanted ears. Far above the planet's surface, the moon of Concordia hummed with quiet unrest. Miners there claimed to hear metal shifting beneath their feet, not the usual grind of machinery, but something older, something watching. Whispers passed from mouth to ear in dimly lit bunkhouses. The Darksaber will return, they said. It still listens. These murmurs weren't declarations of war. They were hopes, half prayers, half defiance, dangerous things. The Darksaber itself had vanished after Bo-Katan Cries' failed defense of Mandalore. Some claimed she surrendered it to avoid further bloodshed. Others swore she had hidden it, waiting for a time the clans could stand together once more. But no one could say where it had gone, not even the surviving members of her house. It was as if the blade had passed into myth, like the founder who first forged it. But myth has weight on Mandalore, and silence never lasts. In the Hall of Bones, buried beneath Sundari's central district, a gathering of elders met in secret. Only 10 remained from the pre-Imperial Council. Most had traded robes for shadows, names for silence. They passed reports like ancient relics, missing shipments, redacted data spikes, entire villages no longer marked on maps, not destroyed, removed, as if peeled from existence without a trace. Outside, the wind moved differently. Mandalore had little weather under its domes, but the filtration vents sometimes howled in strange ways. Lately, they had taken on a low, shivering tone, like a beast growling from beneath stone. Children began waking from shared nightmares. They drew crude shapes in dust, black wings, burning skies, cities folding inward. The elders did not dismiss them. Mandalorians don't fear dreams. They listen to them. There were signs in the wilds too. The Kyber lizards, long used for their sensitivity to seismic shifts, had migrated north far out of season. Their paths traced toward the desert, far from civilization. Hunters reported finding iron shards buried where no forge had ever stood. A tribe of exiles living in the wastes swore they saw lights in the sky. Not stars, not ships, but streaks that pulsed red and vanished before dawn. But no one spoke of war aloud. Not yet. Mandalore had seen too much war. It had lived too long in its shadow. The people had grown weary, yet weariness is not weakness. Beneath every quiet nod, every slow movement, there was a tension, a readiness. The kind passed down through blood and armor. the kind that sleeps with one eye open and never forgets how to load a rifle in the dark. Then came the silence before the first strike. One morning, just after shift change, the comms grid hiccuped. Not failure, disruption. For 12 seconds, every Imperial relay in Sundari went dark. No explosions, no alarms, just absence. Then the lights returned. The troopers continued their march. Civilians returned to their work. But the message was received. In the Foundry District, a hidden forge sparked to life after years of cold. Not loud, not roaring, just a single thread of flame dancing across metal. The smith there, cloaked in dusk brown, worked without saying a word. No sigils marked her armor, no flags hung from her rafters. But she moved with purpose. Beskar was not shaped that day for profit. It was shaped for remembrance. By nightfall, the wind had changed again. Cooler, sharper. And somewhere, deep beneath the crust, something old stirred in its sleep. The city of Sundari had never been fully quiet, not even in its final days. Beneath the domes, beneath the fractured sun lamps and humming air vents, the capital carried a murmur. Boots on steel, doors closing a little too fast. Conversations trimmed short the moment another figure entered the room. The silence of the city wasn't absence, it was compression. A pressure building slowly, between alleys, behind walls, in the spaces where eyes could not reach. Spies worked not in cloaks, but in uniforms. They wore the same armor as the patrols, stood with rifles at rest, but they listened, not just for seditious acts, but for tone, for hesitation. A pause between words, a name spoken with too much reverence. They marked civilians not by violence but by silence. When neighbors stopped knocking, when shopkeepers looked away. Those were the ones brought in. Arrests didn't come with alarms. They came at dusk between shifts, when the district lights dimmed for calibration. 2 troopers, 1 speeder, no noise, no struggle, and no word afterward. The names disappeared from record. Homes remained locked, untouched. Food deliveries arrived and rotted outside sealed doors. No blood, no graffiti, just absence. The loyalists, those who still believed in a united Mand'alor even under occupation, were the first to vanish. Not because they acted, but because they remembered too much. Veterans of the civil wars, former guards of the throne. A few had served Satine Cries in her pacifist government, while others had once fought her, only to bend the knee when it ended. Those who had lived through every shift of power understood its scent, and they had smelled it changing. The upper districts, once home to the more prominent families, became strangely vacant. Windows shuttered, lights left off at night. People stopped asking where house cries had gone. Their balcony gardens withered. Their banners, once tattered but still flying, were gone, not taken down, removed. Threads scraped from stone, a building stripped of identity. It wasn't just the head of the house that vanished. It was the memory of it. The younger clans spoke of it in code. The sky room sleeps, they'd say. The wind no longer touches the terrace. Phrases that didn't mean anything to off-worlders, but cut deep among the natives. The Cries family was many things, divisive, proud, stubborn, but they were still Mandalorian. Their disappearance was not just political, it was surgical. With the capital's leadership fading from sight, control became tighter. Stormtroopers, once patrolling as if to maintain order, now stood at choke points, backs turned to corridors, eyes watching everyone. They no longer answered questions, they issued instructions. New checkpoints appeared at odd intervals, sometimes gone by morning, sometimes permanent. Locals began memorizing alternate paths to markets, adjusting sleep cycles to avoid street inspections. The children stopped playing near the civic square, not because they were told to, but because their parents no longer smiled when they looked in that direction. A statue once stood at its center, a Mand'alor from the old wars, blade raised skyward. One day it was gone. No demolition, no announcement. The stone plinth remained, clean and bare. Some said the Empire never removed it, that it simply sank, cracked under the weight of everything Mandalore had forgotten. Others said it was taken underground by the last true believers, that the blade still pointed upwards somewhere in the darkness. Whispers returned to the moon of Concordia. Supply shipments grew irregular. The mining guild reported miscounts, missing crates, fluctuations in data feeds. No one asked questions out loud, but messages traveled back through the old smuggler routes, symbols carved into crate lids, chalk marks on hangar walls, a series of lines, circles and slashes, always in threes. The old code of the protectors. It meant one thing: prepare. Meanwhile, rumors spoke of a voice traveling through the hidden sectors. A woman, they said, cloaked, helmeted, never staying long. She moved between foundling dens and forgotten tunnels, asking for old stories, not legends, memories, details. Who fought in which battle, which walls still had blood beneath the paint, which families remembered their real sigils. Some called her a ghost, others called her the Blade Mother. No one knew her face. And then, something subtle shifted. One night, the streetlights flickered across an entire block. Not out, not back on, just once. Off, then back. The next morning, 5 Imperial officers transferred out of Sundari. No reason given. A new detachment arrived by evening. Quieter, meaner, helmet visors darker than the last. And those who had watched this happen knew something important. The spies were being watched too. The term jailer began appearing in the local tongue. Quietly at first, painted in alley shadows, etched into scrap metal beneath vendor stalls, a word that had not been used since the era of the mines. It wasn't a rebellion yet. It was a diagnosis. The people of Sundari were prisoners in their own city, and they had begun to admit it. Some whispered of the coming flood, an old phrase, older than the domes. It meant collapse, not just ruin, but cleansing. The kind that washes away even the bones. Mothers used to tell it to their children as warning. Now they said it to each other at dawn, quietly, carefully. The storm hadn't come, but the shadows had grown thicker, and in the depths of Sundari's lower levels, where no patrols walked, a wall cracked open to reveal a forgotten chamber. Dust danced through the broken light. And there, mounted in silence, was a crest no longer found in records. A Mythosaur skull, untouched by time. At the heart of Sundari, buried beneath layers of stone and memory, was the Great Forge, a sanctum of heat, of rhythm, of reverence. Not a factory, not a workplace, but something deeper. It beat like a second heart beneath the city, glowing in ember tones, pulsing with the oldest song of Mandalore. A forge not built, but inherited, its flames passed down from hand to hand, unbroken through wars and peace alike. The forge had never gone cold, not during the reign of the pacifists, not even during the civil wars. Through bombardment and betrayal, through siege and schism, it had endured. It was the soul of Mandalorian craft. Beskar flowed through it like sacred blood, refined, shaped, reborn in flame. Helmets, chest plates, vambraces, every piece mattered. Every strike told a story, and only the chosen knew its full rhythm. The master armorer, elder of Clan Tanner, had no name in public record. None were needed. Those who entered the forge did so under silence, heads bowed. She wore no sigils, carried no rank, but when she spoke, the flames bent to her voice. Her apprentices learned by watching. No lessons spoken, only gestures, sequences, the sound of steel meeting stone in perfect time. That final day began without warning. The sky above Sundari held its usual artificial light, filtered and golden. Below, the forge breathed as it always had, casting its slow red glow across the durasteel floors. The apprentices moved like ghosts, focused and calm. The master armorer stood at the center platform, forging a pauldron with the Mythosaur crest, a gift for a foundling who would never claim it. Then the silence fractured. It started as a hum in the distance, low, dissonant, unnatural. A vibration in the walls. At first they thought it was machinery, an overloaded generator, a tremor from Concordia. But then came the first pulse, a ripple through the floor. The molten channels flickered. One of the crucibles cracked, sending a flare of liquid metal into the air. The armorer turned, lips pressed shut, eyes narrowed, not in panic, but in knowing. Above them, the dome's shield system surged and failed. An electromagnetic pulse, coordinated and precise, tore through the power grid. Lights died, vents froze, and the forge, starved of breath, began to dim. Then from high above came the second blow. Seismic charges dropped from orbit, delivered not by fleet, but by courier drones. Small, surgical, designed for penetration, not spectacle. They struck the upper support layers, bypassing defense systems. The ceiling didn't collapse, it folded. With a thunderless lurch, the weight of the city above shifted downward, cracking ancient pillars, choking airways with dust. The ground beneath the forge buckled, fractured into veins of glowing red. Storage vaults split open. Ingots of raw Beskar spilled across the floor, melting into slag before they could be moved. The apprentices scattered, some running toward the exits, others toward the flames, trying to salvage tools, relics, anything. Two never left. One was caught beneath falling stone. The other, it is said, refused to abandon her anvil. The master armorer moved through the chaos without pause. She did not shout. She did not weep. She reached the central furnace, now sputtering, and knelt beside it. With bare hands, she drew a circle in ash. No words, only breath and motion. Witnesses from the surface would later describe a column of smoke rising from the city's center, black and smooth, rising straight into the sky without dispersing. It didn't drift. It didn't twist. It simply rose, like a mark burned into the air itself. For hours it remained, even as no fire was seen above ground. By nightfall, the forge was gone. Not looted, not overrun. Buried. The Empire made no announcement. No record of seismic activity was released. No official statement acknowledged the event. The building's surface-level entrance was sealed within days. Metal plates welded over, painted grey, patrolled twice per hour. When questioned, the local garrison claimed it had been a structural collapse. No effort was made to recover the dead. And yet the fires beneath still glowed. In secret, in darkness, in corners the sensors failed to scan. Some of the molten metal remained untouched. A small pocket of heat, hidden beneath layers of ruin. And in that heat, rumors began to grow. They say one apprentice survived, scarred, voiceless, but alive, wandering the underlevels with a burned gauntlet and a shard of Mythosaur steel. They say the armorer's final breath was given to the forge, not to extinguish it, but to seal it, to fold the flame inward, to preserve it. And so the great forge, once the center of Mandalorian identity, now sleeps beneath stone and silence. No ceremony, no farewell, just a hollow place where fire once sang. The droids came first, not in droves, not with sirens. Just a few at a time, deployed like scouts into the arteries of Sundari. They weren't the battle models, no tanks, no towering walkers. These were smaller, sleeker, painted a dull grey that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Surveillance units, atmospheric testers, maintenance droids that replaced Mandalorian workers without announcement. One day a technician wouldn't show up for their shift, and the next, a droid with the same routine would glide through the corridor in silence. Locals were told it was for efficiency, that the air quality needed constant analysis, that the dome structures were fragile and required monitoring, that the droids would only assist, not replace. But within a week, market prices collapsed in entire sectors. Jobs were suspended indefinitely. Artisan districts dimmed, no alarms, just slow suffocation. No one called it an invasion because no blaster had been fired. Above the domes, star destroyers lingered in strange patterns. They shifted position hourly, aligning with strange telemetry. Imperial science officers worked in quiet coordination with engineering units, loading silos that had no visible purpose. And then it began to rain. The first storm passed unnoticed, a midnight drizzle that left a faint chemical scent across the Plascrete. By morning, the paint on certain street murals had begun to peel. Statues took on a faint green tarnish. At first, the citizens blamed age, time, acidic pockets in the atmosphere maybe. But the second storm burned deeper. Paper disintegrated, fabrics thinned. Archive doors, once sealed tight, began corroding at the hinges. The Empire blamed faulty filtration in the dome's climate system. Officials promised repairs. Engineers nodded and said nothing. But those in the underlevels knew the truth. This was not neglect. It was a design. The weather was no longer natural, or even artificial in the old sense. It was weaponized. The skies had been repurposed as a slow blade, one that did not cut flesh, but history. By the third week, the targets were more specific. Old archives began to go dark. The main cultural databank, the Sorn-Kai repository, suffered a containment breach during another rainfall. The resulting fire, sparked in the backup server room, spread upward rather than outward, climbing through the internal walls. Fire crews were dispatched, then redirected. The blaze took 6 hours to extinguish. When it was over, more than 9 centuries of records had been reduced to melted crystal and blackened wiring. Mandalor's earliest treaties, writings of the first Mand'alor, entire bloodline logs, gone. But the fire wasn't the only thing burning. In the districts nearest the former palace, houses began lighting up during curfew. Controlled fires, precise, contained. Family heirlooms, armor passed down from clan mothers, banners woven in pre-Clone War dyes, scrolls inked in ancestral dialects, were taken outside and set ablaze by their owners. Not because they wanted to, because someone had made them. A new mandate, quiet, unwritten, enforced by knock, not decree. Those who refused found their doors marked by sunrise, not a symbol, just a strip of black metal bolted to the upper frame, too high for children to reach. A warning that only adults understood. By the next night, that home would be silent. No screams, no resistance, just empty and cold. They called it cleansing. Others called it Operation Cinder. But what was unleashed on Mandalore was something different. The official records of Cinder detail orbital bombardments, climate disasters, and planetary annihilation protocols meant to destroy rebellious systems upon the Emperor's death. But on Mandalore, the Empire took another route. Slower, more surgical, less about destruction, more about disfigurement. They did not want to level the planet. They wanted to break it quietly, not its stone, but its spirit. Families were turned inward. It began with suspicions. A neighbor reporting another for hoarding heirlooms. A child speaking a name outlawed in public. A cousin accepting an extra ration from an officer. Each small betrayal rewarded with food, power, or silence. Trust frayed like old cloth. Clan elders were brought in for questioning, then released, different. Their words dulled, their eyes hollow. One by one, the sacred meeting houses shuttered. The once vibrant murals were scraped clean, not by order, but by weary hands trying to avoid scrutiny. Teachers rewrote their lessons. Smiths stopped marking armor with family sigils. Names were shortened, records deleted by those they once served. In the subterranean dormitories near the capital's edge, an old woman hid a recording crystal behind a false wall. It contained lullabies sung in the dialect of House Vaughan, a tongue now banned. She buried it inside a cracked helmet, her brother's, and sealed the wall with melted plast steel. When the next patrol swept through, they found nothing. She survived the night. The crystal remained untouched. This wasn't warfare as Mandalorians had known it. It was corrosion, 1,000 cuts made not to kill, but to make the culture bleed slowly, enough to forget, enough to surrender meaning before surrendering land. And so Mandalore did not fall in flames, not yet. It bent, quietly, daily, until it no longer recognized the shape of its own shadow. And still, no one spoke the word rebellion. But some began speaking another. Vengeance. It began with the sound of nothing. No warning, no klaxons. Not even the tremble of air that sometimes comes before disaster. Just silence. The kind that arrives between heartbeats, too fast to process, too long to ignore. Sundari slept beneath its dome, its people bent but breathing, unaware that this night would unmake them. Then, the sky opened. TIE bombers broke through the clouds in perfect formation, 6 wide, 30 deep engines howling like hornets. They didn't move with speed, but with certainty. Predators that knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Their descent was slow enough to be seen from every district, eyes lifted from street corners, market stalls, temples, and homes, some in awe, most in dread. It took less than a minute for awe to turn to terror. The first wave struck the outer dome. Cracks spidered across the crystal like veins, glowing under pressure. The surface didn't shatter at first. It held for a second, maybe 2, as if defying the inevitability. Then, with one final groan, the structure caved inward. The sound was not an explosion, but a rupture. Air sucked out, pressure reversing. The wind that followed tore through the district in a howl that bent metal, uprooted market booths, and snapped antennae like reeds. The second wave struck the heart of Sundari. Flames bloomed not from above, but from within. Munitions pierced the dome, but the real devastation came after. Payloads designed to burrow, to detonate beneath walkways and storage levels. The city shook as its foundations cracked. Roads split, towers leaned, residential blocks folded in on themselves. Fire found the oxygen lines and danced through the streets in long, hungry ribbons. Beskar, known to resist blaster fire and lightsaber strikes, could not hold against that kind of heat. Not when struck from all angles, not when trapped beneath tons of collapsing steel. Armor twisted into grotesque spirals, still strapped to the bodies it once protected. It did not melt cleanly. It bent, blackened, clung to its wearers like regret. Entire vaults of the sacred alloy were flash-heated into slag. The foundry fires reignited, but not by the hands of smiths. The forge, long dormant, roared to life from beneath as ruptured fuel lines fed it blindly. It belched smoke into corridors as ancient support beams gave way. Its sacred tools were lost beneath molten stone, reduced to bubbling memory. And still the bombers came. By the fourth wave, the capital was a skeleton of light and smoke. Flame consumed the dome's remains. Debris rained like ash. Those who ran were crushed. Those who stayed were incinerated. Screams echoed through the underways, sharp at first, then hoarse, then gone. The Empire didn't pause. There was no pause. Outside Sundari, the countryside didn't fare better. Satellite domes, smaller communities, farms, temples were struck with the same ruthless precision. Each dome shattered at the apex, its fragments cutting downward like glass rain. The soil beneath them blackened, livestock charred, wind turbines spun wildly in their last moments before the fires took them. In the skies above, command ships hovered with unblinking intent. They did not gloat. They did not issue declarations. They simply watched, cold, distant. A handful of escape shuttles launched from the far edge of the city. Most were struck down within seconds. One or two vanished into hyperspace. Survivors? Maybe. Witnesses? Certainly. Beneath all of this, beneath the rubble, beneath the fire, there were vaults. Old ones, hidden ones. Caverns hollowed out before the Clone Wars, sealed with codes long since buried in the memories of dying clans. Some had been repurposed as shelters in the time before the Purge. Not enough to save a city, but enough to hold fragments. A few families, a child with a training helmet, a warrior who had laid down her blaster years ago, now holding it again. The Empire never breached those vaults. Perhaps they didn't know. Perhaps they didn't care. The focus had been above, the erasure of the visible, the cleansing of presence. But what breathes below is not so easily extinguished. At sunrise there was no city, just smoke. The sun did not pierce it. The sky remained the color of charcoal. The soil, once red and stubborn, turned black with soot and oil. Birds never returned. The air stung with chemicals. Silence claimed what the fire did not. In Mandalorian records, the event would be named Ramal Ipar, the Weeping Fire. But to the wider galaxy, it would carry another name. One whispered by survivors, by droids that recorded the devastation, by rebels who found the ruins and could not speak. The Night of 1,000 Tears, a night that did not end when the fires did. The vaults of ancient Basilisk war droids targeted. A resistance faction attempts to awaken them. Explosions beneath the ice fields. Vaults collapse inwards. Only 2 droids rise before power is lost. One wanders the wasteland still, searching for command. The northern hemisphere of Mandalore was never meant for settlement. Covered in a frozen crust, layered with centuries of storms and silence, it held only the forgotten. Beneath those wind-swept plains, buried under strata of rock and reinforced carbon, slept the Basilisk vaults. Ancient war relics, sealed away during the fall of the last Mand'alor to ride one into battle. Few knew their exact location. Fewer still believed they could ever be reactivated. But after the Night of 1,000 Tears, belief was no longer a luxury. It was fuel. A surviving resistance cell, led by an ex-protector named Dral Vesh, found fragments of the original vault coordinates deep within the ruins of a Concordian relay. The data was scorched and incomplete, but it held enough. Vesh gathered what remained of his warriors, 7 men, 2 women, 1 child too young to wield a blaster, but old enough to carry explosives. They moved beneath the ash storms, wrapped in cloaks stitched from ruined banners. Their mission wasn't survival. It was memory, weaponized. The vault entrance was buried beneath the polar ice. It took 6 days to breach the outer seals, using tools powered by salvaged thermal cores. Each layer peeled back revealed older defenses, long inert but beautifully designed, etched in Mandalorian script, lined with durasteel ribs, reinforced for war, not weather. The final door bore the mark of Mand'alor the Unbroken, scorched black with the passage of time. Inside, the basilisks slept like statues. Over a dozen war droids stood in silence, hunched like beasts in hibernation, covered in frost but intact. Armor plating undisturbed, their wings folded, claws retracted, engines dormant. These were not droids in the modern sense. They were machines bred for devastation, living weapons guided by riders who once sang to them in battle tongue. Vesh knew they wouldn't respond to codes or brute rewiring. They had to be called. The resistance team connected ancient terminals to remaining power cells, rerouting energy from their own gear. The child recited activation phrases from memory, a chant passed down in whispers. At first, nothing happened. Then one of the machines twitched. Its wings jerked, spine flexing as if sensing light for the first time in centuries. A low hum filled the chamber, followed by the groan of shifting hydraulics. Another stirred beside it, visor slits flashing faint blue. 2 basilisks. Not enough to change the course of history, but enough to remind it. Then came the quake. Seismic detectors spiked as charges placed too close to the structural supports, meant to collapse the entrance behind them after departure. Detonated prematurely. The ceiling cracked. Ice fell in jagged sheets. One of the war droids was crushed before it could lift its head. The power lines sparked, hissed, then dimmed. Every other basilisk stilled once more, as if recognizing the moment had passed. As if choosing sleep over waking in a world unworthy of war. The survivors ran. 2 stayed behind to seal the breach and buy time. 1 made it out with a shattered leg. The rest emerged into the night with frost on their brows and fire in their lungs, and the 2 awakened basilisks. Only 1 followed. It flew erratically, its flight stabilizers damaged by the cave-in, trailing smoke across the pale horizon. The other, sleek, steady, silent, lifted high into the storm, then vanished. No rider, no destination, just movement. Weeks passed. The war droid appeared in villages without warning. It landed outside burned farms, scanned the ruins, then departed. Once it left behind a crate of supplies. Another time, a message etched in basic onto a durasteel plate. Awaiting command. No name, no origin, only silence and purpose. Some feared it. Others saw it as a sign. The last echo of a forgotten age, walking the dust. Imperial sensors tracked it, tried to intercept. Nothing worked. The Basilisk flew too low for airstrikes, too erratically for pursuit. It did not attack unless fired upon. When it did, it responded with surgical precision. 1 shot, 1 blast, 1 target neutralized. Then it moved on, like a memory too stubborn to fade. The vault, meanwhile, collapsed entirely, buried once more beneath ice and rubble. No recovery team returned. No official record was made. Dral Vesh and his team scattered. Some say he still searches for another vault. Others claim he became a myth himself, buried in snow beside the machine he awoke. And the Basilisk still roams, its armor scarred, its wings bent, a relic of Mandalor's strength, neither hero nor villain, but witness. It waits not for orders, but for a world worthy of hearing its engines again. A secret parley between Bo-Katan and Moff Gideon. The offer: surrender the Darksaber, spare Sundari. Mandalorians divided, honor versus survival. She yields. Gideon lies. Her name becomes a curse to some, a lament to others. The meeting was never recorded. No transcripts, no witnesses, only traces, scrambled communications, redirected shuttle flight logs, and a missing hour on Bo-Katan Cries' internal tracker. But what happened in that hour shaped the fate of an entire world. Bo-Katan arrived in silence, cloaked and alone. Her night owls had warned her. The clans had warned her. But she went anyway, not to bargain, to weigh. Her options were few, and the enemy had made their offer loud enough for every warrior in hiding to hear. Surrender the Darksaber, and Sundari would be spared. Moff Gideon's camp was buried deep beneath a fractured mesa, shielded from orbital eyes. A mobile command unit disguised as an excavation site. His guards did not speak. His chamber was lit like a tomb. He stood unarmed, at least visibly, and wore no helmet, only a smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. He didn't demand the Darksaber. He described what would happen if it remained in her hands. Entire districts flattened, civilian records erased, families atomized. One symbol, he said, isn't worth 1,000,000 lives. He even offered a corridor for evacuation. A lie, of course. But it was dressed in the kind of language that sounds like peace to someone losing everything. Bo-Katan had heard such tones before, from Republic generals, from Imperial officers, even from Mandalorians. There's a rhythm to every threat made polite. She returned from the parley with her jaw tight, her helmet in hand, and the blade still clipped to her belt. She spoke to no one that night. Her camp remained silent, and the next morning she surrendered the Darksaber, not in public, not with ceremony. It was taken, handed over to a courier in black who said nothing, who made no threat, no gesture of dominance, just extended a gloved hand and departed. The act was done in shadow, but word of it spread like fire on oil. Some called it a necessary evil. Others spat on the ground when her name was spoken. The clans, already fractured from war and grief, broke deeper. To some, she had betrayed the creed, had broken the spine of Mandalorian tradition by yielding a weapon never meant to be handed over. To others, she had made the sacrifice they were too proud to consider. But Gideon lied. The bombing resumed within days. Deadlier, less targeted. The so-called corridor was a trap. Those who entered were gunned down mid-flight. Sundari's last transmission before its total collapse came not from the capital's tower, but from a scavenger ship orbiting the moon. A garbled audio clip, fire, screaming, and then a single word in Mandoa, Shabuir, traitor. Bo-Katan did not respond. She vanished. Some say she fled to conquer dawn. Others claim she died trying to rescue children from a collapsing temple. A few believe she lives still, deep in the underworlds of Mandalore, waiting to reclaim what was lost. But no confirmation ever followed. Only rumor, only echoes. The Darksaber itself passed hands. Gideon wielded it once for ceremony. Then it disappeared into the vaults of whatever project he served next. The weapon that once crowned Mandalorian rulers was no longer a symbol of unity. It was a trophy, a wound shaped like a blade. And so her name became fractured. In the wild regions, her legend was retold by torchlight. Some spoke of her sacrifice with reverence, others cursed her lineage. Even her allies began to disagree on what she'd intended. Did she believe Gideon would honor his word? Or had she known all along it would end in fire, but gambled that her surrender might buy time? No one could agree. But the wound she left remained. In an underground hall beneath a destroyed enclave, a wall bore her face painted in charcoal. Beside it, the symbol of House Cries, and under it the phrase, "She knelt so others might rise." It was written in old script, then slashed through with another blade. Under that, a second phrase was added, "She knelt, and we all fell." The truth no longer mattered. Mandalore was lost, and Bo-Katan's choice, whether it was a betrayal or a salvation, became legend, twisted in retellings, reshaped with time. But the silence that followed her surrender was louder than any battle cry, and it never truly ended. Enclave tunnels beneath the desert, refuge for few. Foundlings wrapped in silence, clutching half-melted armor, Clan Vizsla's remnants plotting retribution. A blind seer tells of the Mythosaurs stirring in dreams. Above them, the sky rains ash without end. The southern deserts of Mandalore were once used for exile. Those banished from the clans wandered its scorched flats, swallowed by heat and silence. But in the aftermath of the Night of 1,000 Tears, that same wasteland became shelter. Deep beneath the dunes, hidden behind layers of stone and memory, lay an ancient network of tunnels, abandoned mining routes reinforced during the old wars, then sealed and forgotten. Dust choked their entrances, and sandstorms buried their markers. Only those who had mapped the planet before the fall could find them again. Within these tunnels, a small enclave survived. Not many, 24 at most, mostly foundlings, a few warriors, one healer. They had fled not out of fear, but because survival offered the only path left to vengeance. There was no light down there except what flickered from scavenged power cores, air recycled through cracked filters, meals scraped from old rations and desert fungi. But they lived. Children whispered in corners, wrapping themselves in worn cloaks and clutching armor pieces warped by fire. A shin plate with a father's clan mark, a scorched gauntlet passed down from a brother who never made it to the tunnels. No full sets remained, only fragments, pieces of old lives held like relics. No tears were shed. Mandalorians did not weep where others could see, but the silence between breaths spoke enough. The remnants of Clan Vizsla occupied the deepest section. 3 warriors, older, scarred, patient in their fury. They wore their helms even in rest, refusing to remove them even to sleep. They did not speak unless spoken to, but when they did, it was always of vengeance. They did not speak of hope, only balance, pain for pain, fire for fire. One of them, Tov Vizsla, had fought in the siege of Mand'alor, back when the Republic still wore friendly faces. He carried a blade forged from scrap, fused with a broken jetpack thruster. Every morning he would stand alone in the training chamber, swinging the weapon as if against ghosts. He never missed. He never smiled. The Enclave had no leader, but it had a guide. A seer, an elder woman with clouded eyes and steady hands. Her name had been lost in the war, but the children called her Boma. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words traveled like cracks through stone. She claimed to see the world as it once was, and sometimes as it may yet become. She spoke of the Mythosaur, not in sermons, not in riddles. She simply told the children what she saw in her dreams, a shadow stirring beneath the roots of the desert, eyes older than language, a heartbeat beneath the ground. She claimed the ash in the sky was not from fire alone, but from its breath, that the world remembered the beast even if the clans had forgotten it, that it waited for a name to awaken it. Some laughed, others listened. Above them the world had changed. Ash clouds rolled endlessly across the horizon, turning the sun into a pale smear. The wind carried soot and silence. Buildings cracked under their own weight. Droids wandered aimlessly, their circuits fried by electromagnetic bursts. The air burned the throat. The Enclave only surfaced when necessary. Scouts would ascend at dusk, when the light was weakest and patrols least frequent. They moved like shadows, dug up half-buried supplies, collected fallen armor, listened to the airwaves for anything. Code fragments, distress signals, even Imperial frequencies. They returned quickly, no questions asked. One night, a scout returned with a broken helmet. It bore the crest of House Rook, a line believed extinct since the orbital bombardment. Inside the helm, tucked behind the chin plate, was a shard of glass. Not just any shard, crystal, carved with a line of ancient Mandalorian text, a prayer to the first beast, a call for resurrection. The seer wept when she touched it. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She said the Mythosaur had turned its head. That night the Enclave did not sleep. Fires were lit, small, controlled. Songs were hummed under breath. The children listened to stories of ancient riders who tamed monsters beneath the moonlight. Warriors who spoke with beasts not through dominance but through understanding. For the first time since the fall, the tunnels held more than survival. They held waiting. The ash never stopped falling. But down in the deep, where the sun could not reach and the dead could not knock, a whisper stirred. It wasn't hope. It wasn't fear. It was older than both. It was the feeling that something was coming back. Empire criminalizes the possession of Beskar. Smugglers, scavengers, and bounty hunters descend. The black market thrives as relics are stripped from corpses. The name Mand'alor is erased from navigation charts. Only one codex remains. A single chip hidden in exile. After the fires, after the screams, after the last tower fell in Sundari, the Empire issued a decree. Not a broadcast, not a speech, just a line of code inserted into sector law and transmitted in silence. Possession of Mandalorian Beskar in any form was now an offense punishable by death. No trial, no appeal. This was not conquest, it was harvest. Imperial recovery teams descended like crows. They moved methodically, sector by sector, ruin by ruin, equipped with specialized scanners calibrated to detect the unique magnetic signature of refined Beskar. Armored corpses were stripped. Burnt-out enclaves were sifted through like abandoned vaults. Helmets were tossed into containers with serial numbers, logged and stacked as scrap. Beskar was no longer sacred. It was raw material. The Empire melted it down to reinforce their own technology. Some went into armor prototypes, others into experimental weapon cores. They didn't care about the craftsmanship. They cared only for its properties, its strength, its rarity, its silence under pressure. Then came the others. Smugglers followed behind the Imperial sweepers, scavenging whatever they missed. Black market agents paid by weight, not legacy. They brought cutting tools, carts, crates, and blasters. Bounty hunters roamed the wastelands with corpse detection droids and modified heat sensors. Some even tracked survivors, not to kill, but to take whatever armor remained. Whether the target was alive or not didn't matter. A shoulder pauldron could fetch more credits than a month of labor on Corellia. The corpses weren't just stripped, they were desecrated. In the deeper levels of the destroyed capital, empty graves formed in rows. Clan vaults torn open and left hollow. Names chiseled off walls. Sigils removed from armor plates with acid. Heirlooms ground into powder to avoid resale tracing. The sanctity of Beskar had not only been broken, it was being sold piece by piece in alley markets on Nar Shaddaa and Canto Bight. Soon, the collectors arrived. They weren't warriors or pirates. They were quiet, pale figures with private ships and private security. They didn't haggle, they simply paid. One collector reportedly bought an entire crate of full suits, uncleaned, some still bloody, for a sum large enough to purchase a frigate. The armor was never seen again, and in time the word Mandalore itself began to vanish. The Imperial data grid no longer recognized it as a valid destination. Astrogation systems flagged it as restricted space. Some star charts deleted it outright. Others renamed the system to an alphanumeric designation, one that didn't appear in public records. Starport beacons were deactivated. Trade routes were rerouted. It was no longer a place. It became a cautionary tale told to smugglers and cadets. Even bounty contracts were rewritten. Targets from Mandalore were reclassified. Their bios omitted clan affiliations. Their faces shone without crests. To speak the name was to draw attention, and so it stopped being spoken. Yet one codex survived. It wasn't a book, not a scroll, just a chip, slightly warped, small enough to be mistaken for junk. Carried not in a vault, but inside the gut of a dying droid found outside a crash site on Kalevala. The droid, barely functional, had been scavenged by a former slicer named Harren Voss. He intended to sell it for parts, but the chip refused to be decrypted. Something in the encryption pulsed, alive almost, old code, pre-Clone Wars structure, the kind used by the Mandalorian archivists of Inseri. And when Voss finally cracked a fragment of it, he saw what it held. Names, bloodlines, genealogy logs, armor blueprints, language files, instructional chants for foundlings, coordinates for vaults never breached. It was more than memory. It was continuity. Voss, who had no ties to Mandalore, smuggled the chip off-world. Some say he sold it to an information broker on Obadiah. Others believe he gave it to a Mandalorian in hiding, a quiet figure who wore no crest but moved like someone trained by the Creed. Either way, the chip vanished, but its contents had already been partially duplicated, spread in fragments across encrypted servers, embedded in false transponder signals and forgotten droid networks. The Empire never found it. They thought the war was over, that the clans were dust, that Beskar belonged to them now. But deep in the outer rim, on backwater moons and beneath collapsed cities, warriors still whispered the name they weren't supposed to say. Not out loud, not often, but enough. Mandalore was gone from the maps, but not from the blood. The moon becomes the last sanctuary. Tribes swear the creed anew, forsaking names. A lone armorer reforges scraps into tradition. A child finds a fragment of the Darksaber blade. They call the future the Way, but do not speak of war. After Mandalore fell, its moons became shadows, overlooked, ignored, assumed barren. Concordia was the largest, long stripped of its mining wealth, its cities reduced to husks of metal and dust. Once a base for Deathwatch, once a graveyard for traitors. Now it was all that remained. Not a stronghold, a sanctuary. The Empire had no reason to return. There were no resources left to steal, no structures left to repurpose. The scanners marked Concordia as depleted and inhospitable, but beneath its rocky surface, behind old mining shafts and collapsed transport tubes, survivors gathered. Not many, less than 100. But they carried more than weapons. They carried memory. The tribes came quietly, one ship at a time. A cloaked freighter from Kalevala, a medical shuttle from Sundari's ruins, a converted hauler bearing a scratched sigil of Clan Eldar, painted over with ash. They did not bring banners. They brought silence and pain. No one asked for leadership. There were no ceremonies, just nods, shared meals, long hours of work. The surface was hostile, the cold biting, the wind sharp as razors. But they endured. They built warmth into the stone, dug new chambers, repaired old power lines. Food grew in vertical trays, lit by salvaged reactor glow. The air recycled with a hum that never stopped, not even during sleep. Names were spoken less and less. The survivors chose to set them aside, not out of shame, but necessity. Names carried weight. Clans carried judgment. Too many had lost too much to keep pretending they were whole. Instead, they swore the creed again, not as individuals, but together. Not to rise, not to avenge, simply to remain. The words were recited in low voices, echoed off stone walls, passed down to the foundlings. This is the way. One of them, an armorer without a sigil, took to the forge alone. She did not speak often. Her helm bore no crest. Her armor was pieced together from scraps of fallen kin. But she worked tirelessly, gathering melted Beskar from what little remained, a gauntlet here, a shin plate there, and reforging it into new forms. She melted the past to preserve it. Her tools were old, her hammer hand steady. She said nothing while she worked, but those who watched felt reverence rise from every strike. She forged not for war, for tradition. Each piece she made held echoes of those who came before. A pauldron reforged from a visor shattered in Sundari. A chest plate stamped with a single ridge, shaped from the ribs of a collapsed dome. The armor she made was not beautiful. It was grounded, and it was worn with care. The children gathered around her at night, watching her polish a cooling helm or engrave a symbol with the edge of a vibroblade. She never told stories, but her silence taught them more than words. One child, small, quiet, observant, wandered deeper into the caves than allowed. He was not lost, just curious. In a half-collapsed shaft, hidden behind an old mining loader, he found something glinting in the dust. At first he thought it was scrap, just another shard of wreckage caught in the rocks. But when he touched it, it hummed. It was a piece of the Darksaber, not the hilt, not a full blade, just a sliver, jagged, thin, scorched black along the edge, barely longer than his hand, but unmistakable. It pulsed faintly with energy, diminished but not dead. He brought it to the armorer. She took it without a word, held it to the forge light, studied the weight, then nodded. Not in recognition of the blade itself, but in acknowledgement of the child. She did not try to reforge it. She placed it in a small niche above her workbench, where it would remain. A reminder, not of power, of responsibility. The story of the Darksaber was not retold. No one dared recite the names that had wielded it. That time was gone. The blade was broken, and so was the world that shaped it. But the fragment stayed, watching, waiting, not revered, not feared, simply remembered. The people did not speak of rebellion. They did not plot. They planted. They grew fungus in damp corners, cultured water bacteria in tanks, taught children how to weld, how to cook, how to speak the old tongue. They did not train for battle, but they trained for endurance, for the long years, for something that might come later. They stopped speaking of Mand'alor as a place and began calling it something else. The way. Not a destination, not a flag, a path. And while ash continued to fall on the worlds they left behind on Concordia, a different silence grew. Not hollow, rooted. They would not speak of war again, but they had not forgotten how to survive. Seers speak of visions, a beast beneath the living waters. Foundlings dream of eyes glowing in the dark. A chant begins. The Mythosaur breathes. The waters boil one night beneath the mines. Silence follows. The earth remembers. The mines beneath Mand'alor were silent for decades. Caverns once carved by ancestors became tombs of dust, sealed off by collapse, corrosion, and grief. Above them the planet wore its wounds openly, charred valleys, crumbled domes, glassy plains scorched by orbital fire. But deep below, beyond what scanners could see, something ancient endured. The living waters still flowed. Buried under layers of rock and rubble, their warmth pulsed like a heartbeat. The radiation never touched them. They remained untouched by decay, preserved by something older than technology. Pilgrims used to come from across the sector to bathe in their current, seeking healing, vision, absolution. That tradition ended with the Purge, or so it was believed. Then came the dreams. It started with one seer in exile. She'd lived hidden in the jagged ridges beyond the old mines, speaking to no one but the wind. Her voice had once echoed through the courts of Sundari. Now it trembled from within a hollowed-out dome. She claimed the Mythosaur had stirred, not in the sky, not in the sea, but in sleep. Beneath the waters, it dreamed. And when it dreamed, Mand'alor listened. Her vision passed quickly between enclaves, whispered through rusted comlinks, and passed from cave to cave like contraband. Many dismissed it, a few prayed, but the strangest confirmation came from the children. Foundlings scattered across Concordia, Kalevala, and beyond began speaking of eyes. Not nightmares, visions. They described a great shape beneath stone, yellow irises wider than their bodies, scales like armored plates, no growl, no roar, just breathe. A low exhale that made their bones rattle in sleep. Some drew it on the walls with charcoal. Others simply murmured to themselves in the night. The same words again and again. The Mythosaur breathes. None had ever seen it. None knew its name until that phrase came to them. But their descriptions matched. And their guardians, hardened warriors who feared no ghosts, began to feel unsettled. The mines had been sealed since the bombardment. Few dared go near them. Sensors malfunctioned near the old entrances. Gravity wells warped in strange patterns. Geological scans returned only static. Even the Empire avoided them during the occupation, dismissing the area as structurally unsound. And still, the dreams persisted. Then, one night, the waters boiled. It happened without warning. Deep sensors buried beneath the crust picked up a sudden spike. Thermal activity in a dead zone. Not volcanic, not tectonic. Liquid movement. Pressure changes. A heat bloom that lasted just under a minute. Then it stopped. An old mining droid, still operational in the outer caverns, recorded the noise. The recording was scratchy, broken, but something moved. Not rock slide, not machinery. A slow surge, like a body turning in a confined space. The sound lasted 13 seconds, followed by silence. Seers claimed it was a turning, not a reawakening, not yet, but movement. The beast had shifted in its rest, and Mand'alor had felt it. Small cults began to form across the outer rim. Not militarized, not loud, just small gatherings, 5 here, 8 there, who met to recite the old stories. Not to speak of conquest or creed, but of beginnings. They did not pray for victory. They listened. They waited. Even on Concordia, the silence was interrupted. A group of foundlings in the southern tunnels stopped their chores and sat in unison. They said nothing, just faced the same direction, toward the deep. One of them, the smallest, placed her hand on the ground. Her fingers trembled. She later said it felt like the world exhaled. No proof, no visuals, no physical trace. But something had changed. The phrase began to appear in places no one expected. Scratched into the side of a transport container, whispered by a scavenger dying in an airlock, etched in soot on the ruins of a forgotten forge. The Mythosaur breathes. No one led this chant. It had no face, no banner, but it spread, not as a rallying cry, as a truth, the kind that does not need proof to echo. The waters were quiet again, but they had been disturbed, and in the layers of the world where light had never reached, something immense waited. Not hungry, not angry, just awake. An ancient helmet is unearthed on the edge of the dune sea. runes on the inside unseen since the old wars. A child of no name takes up the helm. Their voice echoes with forgotten power. The clans begin to stir again. The Dune Sea had always buried more than bones. It swallowed history, dragged it beneath layers of wind and time, and held it without ceremony. What remained of Mandalor's southern wastes was silent and scorched, peppered with wreckage and memory. Scavengers passed through quick and quiet. Raiders stripped what little was left. But the sand itself kept secrets. One of those secrets broke the surface during a storm. A sandcrawler, half abandoned and wheezing through a dying repulsor lift system, drifted across the flats as the sky blackened. The storm hit harder than expected, carving gullies in the dunes with sheets of dry wind. When it passed, a section of rock, jagged and old, was exposed near the western ridge. Buried beneath it, stuck in the cracked earth like a blade in bone, was a helmet. Blackened, heavy, crusted with age. Not standard Mandalorian iron, not Imperial alloy. Its shape was different, wider at the brow with slanted cheeks and a narrow, crestless dome. The visor slit had long since faded into shadow. Sand had etched deep grooves across its face, but on the inside, untouched by time, runes shone faintly in a pattern long lost to most living clans. The Jawas who found it sold it without thought. They did not understand its weight. It passed through 3 traders in 5 days. One died in his sleep. Another disappeared during hyperspace transit. The third left it behind without a word on a supply run to Gargan. Eventually, it ended up in the possession of a wandering, clanless caravan. Mandalorians without name, born after the fall, raised in silence. The child found it while sorting supplies. No older than 8, quiet, and often overlooked. They did not speak often, and none remembered what name they'd once been given. They carried no crest. Their armor was a patchwork of offcuts and borrowed plates, fastened together with fiber cord and patience, but they were always watching. The moment the child touched the helmet, the air shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but the air in the room felt heavier, older. The runes inside the helm pulsed with faint amber light. It did not ignite. It did not glow like technology. It breathed, once, and then stilled. The child placed it on their head. Those nearby expected the weight to crush them, but the child stood taller, straight. They said nothing for several minutes. When they finally spoke, their voice carried a resonance it had never held before, still young, but no longer uncertain. The voice of the Mand'alor is not gone. That sentence was not learned. It was remembered. Some in the caravan laughed nervously. Others stepped back. A few watched in silence, as if recognizing something not seen in generations. The child did not command, did not claim. They simply wore the helm and walked. Later that night, the campfire burned higher than usual. Word spread, not quickly, not publicly, just in pulses. Whispers carried on unregistered frequencies. A phrase here, a name removed from context, a coordinate dropped into a maintenance file where no one would think to look. Clan Wren received the message first, then what remained of Clan Rook. Even the Vizsla survivors on Concordia heard the signal. No summons, no demand, just a pattern, one that hadn't pulsed since the old wars. The runes encoded in the helm were more than decorative. They were a frequency key, a forgotten tongue embedded into Beskar itself, the language of the Mandalor's first armorers, a voice not meant for speech, but for transmission. It was enough. The clans began to move, not in force, but in formation. Small gatherings met in remote corners of the system, not to fight, to listen, to see the child, to see the helm, Some were skeptical, others knelt. No words were exchanged about vengeance, rebellion, or war. Only one question was asked: "Do you walk the way?" And the child answered, "Not as ruler, not as prophet, but as witness. I walk where the voice leads." The storms returned the next night, covering the rocks once more. But the helm remained unburied. The old ways had not returned. They had simply begun to stir. The shattered blade is reforged, humming with new light, its wielder unknown, masked in shadow. Some say he was born of Concordia's dust. Others say she walked from the lava unburned. The Darksaber chooses. It is not asked. The Darksaber had been broken for years, splintered in battle, lost in retreat, buried in wreckage no one dared search. Its fragments were scattered, some melted, others hidden, a few stolen and sold to those who mistook them for scrap. What made it unique had not been the blade alone, but its story. That story had ended, most believed, with the fall of Mand'alor. But a blade forged in defiance does not fade so easily. The hilt was found first, cracked but intact, discovered beneath the wreckage of a collapsed stronghold near the molten rivers of the southern shelf. It had been fused to the stone, its emitter dark and cold. A prospector tried to pry it loose. The rock cracked. The hilt slipped out on its own. The shard came later, a sliver no longer than a finger, unearthed on Concordia by a scavenger who never revealed their name. The shard hummed faintly when held, not loudly, just enough to be noticed. It pulsed once, then again, then went still. Within hours, the scavenger was gone. No trace, no trail. And then it was heard again. A sound carried across encrypted frequencies, hidden within the static of forgotten channels. A hum, low, sharp, unmistakable. Not a broadcast, a test, a warning. Some dismissed it. Others stopped speaking. Those who had once held the blade in their line, those who had fought to protect it or destroy it, heard something else. A return. No one saw the reforging. No recordings. No witnesses. But word spread quickly. The Darksaber was whole again. It did not look exactly as it once had. Its edge pulsed darker. The light that once flickered along its surface now ran smoother, more fluid, like ink trailing through water. The hum was deeper, hungrier, a song drawn from silence. Its wielder appeared not with ceremony, but in aftermath. A gang of raiders, outfitted in stolen Mandalorian armor, was found scattered in the canyons near Arueti Pass. 8 bodies, no blaster marks, no carbon scoring, just one clean strike through each, not through the chest or head, through the sigil. The corpses were left unburied. At their center, scorched into the rock, was the mark of the Darksaber. The wielder wore no crest. Their armor was smooth, dark, unpainted. Their voice, when heard, was modulated beyond recognition. Some who saw them said the figure was tall, silent, efficient. Others said they moved with a grace too fluid to be a man. Some claimed the wielder was born of Concordia's dust, hardened by exile and shaped by vengeance. Others swore she had walked through lava flows without burning, emerging from the fissures where old forges once lived. No name was ever given. They came to settlements in the outer moons, never asking for shelter, only leaving symbols behind. Restored clan marks on shattered walls. A piece of Beskar hung at the edge of a gate. One broken shield, welded back together with the line, "Stand again." They did not speak of rule, but those who met them remembered the weight in the air, something ancient, something that pulled the voice low and stilled the hand. They didn't need to make declarations. The blade spoke for them, not loudly, just enough. The clans noticed, slowly, quietly. Small warbands that had long since fractured began holding council again. Elders who had refused to return to the creed began whispering old prayers. Foundlings carried stories between moons. Messages once lost in encryption reappeared in old channels, unlocked by a rhythm only a few remembered. A rhythm the blade now pulsed in silence. The armorer on Concordia carved a new line above her forge. It read, "It chooses again." Because the Darksaber does not wait for a hand to claim it. It does not answer to rank or bloodline. It answers to will. And this time, it answered to someone unknown. Not claimed, not crowned, but chosen. The scattered clans gather. Deathwatch, Clan Wren, Cries' heirs. Tensions flare. Old wounds bleed anew. A challenge issued not by word, but by blood. The masked one defeats them all, without drawing a blade. A pact is sworn under starlight, and no one speaks of the past. There was no summons, no herald. Only a message passed hand to hand across the stars, encoded in a signal older than the Republic, spoken in rhythm through the comms static. A single phrase, "All roads lead to the wastes." They came in silence. Clan Wren arrived first, leaner than before, fewer in number, but still proud. Their armor bore the scars of exile, bright colors dulled by years of dust. Then came what remained of House Cries, noble in bearing, with helms carved in the old Sundari style. They walked slowly, carrying the weight of a name that had once cracked a planet in two. And then, like a shadow beneath the moons, came Deathwatch. The old loyalists, thought broken, had never scattered. They had simply gone quiet. Their armor was darker now, less adorned, no longer seeking the Mand'alor, only waiting to see who would dare claim the role next. None of them spoke when they entered the ruins. They did not need to. The meeting point was a hollowed-out stronghold at the edge of the Black Dune wastes, where ash storms made the air bitter and the wind sang through rusted steel. What remained of the structure had no roof, only the stars above and a floor cracked by time. Bones of old walkers rose in the distance, half swallowed by the sand. It was here the clans stood, not shoulder to shoulder, but in wary circles, eyes sharp behind visors. The masked one arrived last. No fanfare, no escort, just the sound of footfall on stone. They stood at the edge of the gathering, silent, the reforged Darksaber sheathed across their back. They said nothing, and yet every helmet turned, every breath slowed. No one had called this a council. It had not been agreed to by creed or vote. But when warriors gather in a circle and remain long enough in silence, something ancient begins to settle. Then came the accusations. Soft at first, veiled, indirect. Old blame resurfacing like buried fire. Who had abandoned whom? Who had surrendered? Who had fractured the line when it could have held? Deathwatch spoke of the cowardice of peace. Clan Wren snapped back with stories of betrayal in the capital. The heirs of Cries said little, but every word they gave stung like sharpened ice. The fire built slowly until one removed their helmet. A warrior from Clan Wren, eyes like scorched copper, voice steady with years of quiet rage. "The blade does not make a Mand'alor," she said. "Let them prove it." No challenge was issued in words, just a step forward, then another. 4 more followed, one from each clan, each believing they had the right, each unwilling to kneel. The masked one did not reach for the Darksaber. Instead, they removed their cloak and stood unarmed. The first warrior struck with a staff. The masked one stepped aside. No noise, no impact, just motion. The second came faster, blades drawn. One twist, one turn, a trip, a fall, diffused without injury. The third attempted a grapple. Their own momentum sent them into the wall. None of it was flashy. None of it was cruel. It was precise, measured, the movements of someone not there to dominate, but to remind. When the last challenger dropped to one knee, gasping for air but still alive, no one else moved. The masked one stood in the center of the cracked floor, surrounded by silence. A blade never drawn. A challenge met not with force, but with clarity. Beneath the starlight a pact was made, not in writing, not in speech, no promises, no boasts, but armor touched armor, visors nodded, and for the first time in years, Mandalorians from across fractured lines stood without aiming weapons at each other. The past remained unspoken, not because it was forgiven, but because it had been survived. What followed was not unity, not yet, but something close enough to build on. And when they dispersed at dawn, there were no titles exchanged, no new banners unfurled. Only the understanding that something had begun again. And this time, no one would claim it alone. The Mythosaur surfaces in the salt plains of Karthtor, a shape beneath the crust, moving, watching. Pilgrims walk barefoot for miles, just to kneel in silence. The air grows warm when it passes. No one dares mark its path. The salt plains of Karthtor had been dead for centuries, flattened by centuries of wind erosion, stripped of minerals by ancient strip mining, and scorched by orbital strikes during the final days of the Purge. The terrain stretched unbroken for hundreds of kilometers, white, featureless, cracked. Nothing lived there. Nothing grew. Even scavengers avoided it. The earth was too dry to bury anything and too hard to remember what once stood. But something moved beneath it. It started with tremors, not seismic, not the kind that registered on scanners, the kind that left no trace on instruments, but made your bones hum for hours afterward, the kind that cracked small stones without touching them, the kind that made warriors wake in the night without knowing why. Then the animals left. Flocks of Kartai birds that roosted in the nearby canyons took flight and did not return. The few remaining dewhawks scattered from the northern cliffs. Even the scavenger drones deployed by the surviving clans returned blank. Disrupted footage, static over sand, distorted shadows stretching impossibly long, heat blooms where there was no sun. One night, the ground swelled. A rise in the center of the plain, barely a meter at first, software almost invisible. By morning it had spread. The crust cracked in a spiral, wide enough to be seen from low orbit. Still, no explosion, no collapse, just movement, slow and deliberate, like something vast shifting beneath heavy silk. That was when the first pilgrims came. They arrived without banners, without weapons. Word had passed across Mandalorian space, not through channels but through instinct, dreams, a voice, a pull, no command, just the certainty that something was there. Something older than the Darksaber, older than the Creed, older than Mand'alor itself. They came barefoot, some with armor removed, others with it reshaped, stripped of color and sigil, not out of shame, out of reverence. Some walked for days, others for weeks. A few came alone, others in quiet lines stretching across the dunes. They left their ships at the edge of the plain. Not a single vessel touched the salt. That became the first rule, unspoken but followed. Do not disturb the crust. By the third week the camp had grown, tents made from old banner cloth, cooking fires surrounded by silence. No one sold food. It was given. No names were exchanged, no ranks declared. All who arrived knelt, not to the sun, not to a shrine, just to the earth, listening. Then came the warmth. Not from fire, not from the wind, from the ground itself. It started just before dawn, a low exhale through the cracks. Dry air turned humid. The salt seemed to shimmer. Warriors stood still, helms in hand. Foundlings placed palms to the ground and wept without knowing why. The warmth wasn't searing. It wasn't dangerous. It was steady, rhythmic, like breath through stone. The seers among them confirmed it, not with data, with certainty. The Mythosaur has returned. They spoke it not as prophecy, not as hope, as fact. The old texts had described them as beasts of war, massive horned titans that ruled the surface before the first dome was ever built. But now, with the world cracked open and no cities left to claim, something else had risen, not a weapon, a presence. Every few days the swell of land shifted. No pattern, no circle. Just a slow ripple, a migration of sorts, as though the creature beneath the surface chose to move where it pleased. No one followed, no one mapped it. That was the second rule, never mark its path. The old ways had taught them to seek dominance, but this was not something to conquer. It was something to acknowledge. A clan from the outer rim brought an offering, a helm from the First War, scorched and still holding bloodstains. They placed it at the edge of the swell and waited. By morning the helm had vanished. No wind, no prints, only a deep impression in the salt, the shape of a claw wider than a man's torso. They said nothing, only bowed and walked away. Even the masked one came. No escort, no blade drawn. They stepped onto the edge of the plain and removed their helm, held it in their arms like a vessel. They did not kneel, they stood, for hours. And when they left, the air behind them rippled faintly, and the ground cooled as if sighing in return. Scholars, even those in exile, began compiling records again, observing, measuring. But every attempt to define what moved beneath the salt failed. There was no signature, no constant rhythm. Its shape could not be captured. Its path could not be predicted. That was the third rule. Do not name what stirs. It was no longer a legend, no longer a creature of war stories and campfire tales. It was here, breathing, moving, not asking to be seen, only felt. And so the people stayed, not waiting for battle, not demanding signs. They walked barefoot, they sat in silence, and they listened, because the Mythosaur no longer needed to roar to be known. It was awake, and Mandalore would never sleep the same again. Sundari's ruins unearthed by the new clans. Children find old bones, still in armor. The forge is found intact but buried. A single spark lights the coals. The fire does not die. The wind over Sundari had grown quiet. For decades it had howled through the broken dome, scattering ash across the black stone. The bones of towers lay where they had fallen, buried in layers of soot and time. The streets were shattered lines between sunken districts. No one had returned. Not after the bombing, not after the purge. The name Sundari was whispered with grief, never with direction. But the clans came anyway. They arrived without procession. No banners, no broadcast, no call for recognition. Only small ships, old, patched, painted in fresh sigils, descending past the ragged edge of the dome's remains. The first to land stepped onto the same ground where their ancestors had once marched in rows, armor polished, heads high. Now the dust clung to their boots. Their visors scanned ruins long since declared uninhabitable. The children moved first. They weren't sent. They wandered. Too young to remember the fall. Too stubborn to stay behind. They slipped through cracks in the foundation, followed tunnels scorched by fire, and crawled into crevices where light still flickered from shattered ceilings. Their voices echoed down forgotten hallways. That's where they found the bones. still in armor, piled beneath collapsed walls, slumped against blast doors, curled in corners where the fire had not reached. Not arranged, not buried, just waiting. Some still held weapons. Others had been burned through the chest or head. Most were silent witnesses to the last stand of a people who had not knelt, even as the skies fell. One child found a helmet, scorched black but intact. It bore the faint crest of House Vizsla, its paint faded by heat and time. They didn't speak. They carried it out of the ruins and placed it at the entrance, gently, like returning a crown to a throne. The elders followed the children deeper. They moved methodically, carefully, scanning for stability, for traps, for anything that might still be waiting. But there was no resistance, no threat, just silence. And then, on the third day, beneath the central district where the power conduits once met, they found the forge. It had been buried beneath a collapsed generator core. Twisted beams blocked its entrance, and the air was thick with ash. But the structure held. The walls bore heat fractures, but they stood. The anvil was cracked, but not broken. The great crucible, half filled with old slag, sat cold and silent. The forge had survived. No words were spoken. None were needed. The armorer stepped forward, not the one who led them, but the one who knew fire. Her armor was dull. Her hands were calloused. She knelt before the coals, cleared them with slow, deliberate motion, revealing the deep basin beneath. Her fingers brushed against something metallic. A tool, left behind by a smith who had likely died at her post. She set it aside without pause. She struck flint once, twice. The third spark caught. The fire returned. Not a blaze, not yet. A glow, steady, warm. It spread along the inner edge of the crucible. The coals breathed in silence. The room didn't erupt with cheers. The clans didn't chant. They stood still, watching, listening. The forge was alive. It hadn't been kindled in over 30 years, but the metal remembered. The stone did not resist. The walls, scorched though they were, embraced the light. The room warmed. The breath of the space changed. Armor was not forged that day. No blades were quenched. But something shifted. The following morning the children returned. Each brought something: scrap, bone, ash-covered heirlooms. One brought a broken chest plate they found beneath a collapsed stairwell. Another, a pile of dog tags inscribed with old sigils. None of them spoke. They placed their offerings at the base of the forge and stepped back. The adults did the same. One by one, without ceremony, they laid down pieces of old Beskar, melted vambraces, cracked greaves, finger-length shards from fallen blades, a mountain of memory, a silence of tribute. No names were spoken, no lineages recited. They let the fire hold it all. Later that day, a scout returned from the outer ruins with a data core. Damaged, fragmented, recovered from what used to be the Hall of Records. It contained blueprints, armory designs, smithing techniques, the lost calibrations of the Great Dome's energy systems. Some files were corrupt, some were blank, but among them was a schematic for reforging heat-resistant alloy with volcanic core integration, technology lost during the Clone Wars. The data was handed to the armorer. She said nothing, only nodded. The clans did not rebuild Sundari. Not yet. There was no talk of walls, no discussion of reclaiming districts, no grand plan to restore the city as it once stood. But they stayed. They cleared the forge, repaired what they could, brought tools from distant enclaves, whispered to one another of what had been lost, of what might be made again, not with pride, not with haste, with precision. The fire remained lit, watched over in shifts. It was fed sparingly. It was honored quietly. But it did not die. and neither would they. The way is rewritten, not replaced. Foundlings are taught the legends once spoken in hushed tones. Armor is blessed with the old sigils. A new oath. We do not forget. We become. The galaxy begins to notice. They didn't call it a reformation. No words like doctrine, no councils, no manifestos. It began in whispers, like the way had always done, passed from voice to voice, hand to hand, armor to armor. The creed was not thrown away. It was remembered aloud, spoken again with breath, not fear. The words were old, but now they had space to grow. The armorer at the forge spoke first, though never in command. Her words echoed through the soot-warmed chambers as she engraved the first reawakened sigil into a pauldron reclaimed from the ruins. Not her own sigil. One lost during the fall of Enseri. She did not name it. She traced it slowly, then raised the metal toward the firelight. "This is how we carry the past," she said. "Not by weight, by shape." Foundlings gathered closer. They had grown up on fragments, half stories told in the dark, legends preserved in tone but missing detail. Now they heard everything. The old tales of the first Mand'alor, of the Mythosaur, of the moon duels between clans, long vanished. Myths that had once been used to shame or silence now flowed like water across stone. These were no longer secrets for warriors or chosen bloodlines. They were shared, taught like breathing. One foundling asked, "Did the creed always forbid names?" The armorer paused, then answered, "No. It forbade forgetting." So names returned. Some chose old ones, revived from buried lineages, pulled from damaged records. Others took new ones, drawn from the sounds of the wind over the plains, the colors of firelight on steel. Not titles, not claims, just identity, rediscovered. The way, once rigid and narrow, began to widen, not into chaos, into clarity. Clans no longer argued over interpretation. They listened. The forges across Sundari echoed with voices speaking the oath in a new tongue, less formal, but no less solemn. It was no longer only about armor, survival, or silence. It was about becoming something worthy of the fire. A new oath emerged. We do not forget, we become. We walk not behind, but beside. This is the way. It wasn't voted upon. It wasn't inscribed in stone. It simply spread, through repetition, through resonance. Each time armor was forged, a mark was added beneath the inner plate, a crescent arc, shallow and unpainted, pressed by hand. Not clan, not status, just proof that the piece had been made with intention. Armor was no longer just inherited. It was witnessed, forged with story, cooled with memory. Foundlings wore theirs with reverence. During training sessions, when blades clashed in echoing halls and dust kicked up in the sparring circles, instructors taught more than strikes and stance. They taught what the armor remembered. Which plate had shielded a sister, which vambrace had caught the bolt meant for a healer. Every dent mattered now. The creed had been spoken once only in defense. Now it was spoken as renewal. Pilgrimages returned, not to temples, to sites, scars of battle, broken halls, the places where clans had fallen and refused to rise. Small groups gathered, reciting lines from the old tongue over the ruins, not mourning, witnessing. The Mythosaur was no longer a beast of prophecy. It was a presence, a reminder that something larger breathed beneath the silence. The children began to carve its horn into corners of their rooms, not out of fear or worship, but because they wanted to remember what stirred when everything else slept. The galaxy noticed, first in whispers, then in warnings. Bounty pings declined. Contracts targeting Mandalorians quietly vanished from the boards. Traders began asking questions at refueling stations. Had anyone heard what was happening in Sundari? Ships painted with the old sigils flew again, not attacking but escorting, protecting convoys, guarding ruins. A spice freighter attacked by pirates near Dakar was saved by a single Mandalorian ship. No identification, no reply. Just a crest painted in silver on the hull, the crescent arc beneath a visor. Then gone. Even on Coruscant, in halls far from the outer rim, advisors whispered the name again. Not with threat, with caution, with memory. Not because a new Mand'alor had risen, but because a people had stopped kneeling to the past and begun standing in the present. The creed had not changed. It had awakened. Traders return. Farmers settle. Refugees are welcomed. Jedi walk cautiously through the dust of ancient wars. A treaty offered to the New Republic, then declined. Mandalore chooses no side, but every voice. A Mandalore stands alone, but the people stand with them. The first to return were the traders. They came in weathered ships, hulls scorched from years of avoiding hyperspace lanes, their cargo holds filled not with weapons, but with seed, tools, textiles, repaired solar cells from long-abandoned systems. Most had once flown under Mandalorian protection. Many owed their lives to a forged plate or a timely escort. They didn't come seeking profit. They came to see what had endured. They found fields being cleared by hand, burned soil scraped clean with blades, water pulled from deep beneath the rock, foundlings carrying buckets while warriors drove in irrigation rods, a forge lit, still glowing red in the center of Sundari's ruins. No guard posts, no warnings, just a glance from the visor at the gate. That was enough. Next came the farmers, not all Mandalorian. Some had been born in the outer rim, where lore faded into myth and survival depended on your neighbors more than your flags. They brought animals, small herds, flightless grazers, drought-resistant seed strains, knowledge of slow growth. They were given land outside the capital's shadow, no deed, no credits exchanged, just a promise. We protect each other. Then, the refugees. Some from the mid-rim, displaced by gang wars or sector-wide famines. Others from collapsed colonies where supplies had stopped arriving and leaders had vanished into credits and stars. They were not questioned, only scanned for illness, then shown where to pitch their homes. One family, fleeing from the wreckage of a pirate siege near Arcanis, wept when they found shelter beside a Mandalorian outpost with no lock on its door. Word spread faster than anyone could contain it. And then came the Jedi. Just one at first. Robes sun-bleached, saber never drawn. He walked the ruins alone, touched the cracked murals of old Sundari, stood for an hour beneath the sky hole in the dome, eyes closed. A warrior followed him the entire time, but never spoke. When the Jedi finally turned, he only said, "I came to see if the silence had broken." The warrior nodded. It has. The Jedi left without asking to stay. Others followed, some in twos, some alone. They were watched, not with hostility but memory. History hung thick between every step. They walked carefully through the city, sat with foundlings in the rebuilt halls, traded stories of ancient saber duels, and shared what they knew of the stars beyond Mandalore. The creed was never questioned, and the Jedi never tried to change it. Then a message arrived. The New Republic offered contact, a treaty, economic relief, recognition, full rights as a sovereign system. The offer was delivered with respectful distance, not fanfare. It came sealed, encoded, and delivered by a droid programmed only to recite and receive. The Mandalore did not reply immediately. There was no council convened. No debate broadcast to the camps, just quiet conversation in the forges, in the tunnels beneath the city, in the walkways where children ran without fear. Warriors voiced concern, elders voiced caution, traders, farmers, and refugees voiced gratitude. The final answer came from the Mand'alor alone. "We thank you," the reply read, "but we have learned how to stand." No insult, no arrogance, just fact. The treaty was declined, not out of pride, out of clarity. Mandalore had become something different now. Not a pawn, not a weapon, not a territory to be claimed or protected. It was a place of return, of rebuilding, of memory, made solid through labor. They opened ports, but not to politics. They welcomed trade, but not influence. They accepted aid, but did not bend for it. A Jedi emissary returned months later and asked one question: "What is your side?" The Mandalore gave no speech. They only turned to the people gathered in the market square, armored and unarmored, old and young, Mandalorian and not, and said, "All of them." There were no cheers, just a silence that held. And in that silence, the meaning settled. Mandalore would not rise as an empire again, nor a vassal, nor a banner to be flown above others. The Mandalore stood alone, but the people no longer stood behind. They stood beside. A child vanishes into the deep caverns, found 3 days later wrapped in scales. She speaks in tongues long thought extinct. The Mythosaur watches from afar, never attacks. Its shadow circles above the forge once more. Her name was Turner, small, sharp-eyed, quick with silence. One of the foundlings born in the black soil of the outer wastes, raised beneath the old forge's light. She wore no clan sigil, only a strand of polished bone tied around her wrist, taken from the jaw of a desert scavenger, given to her by a brother who had since vanished into the stars. Tierna had always wandered too far, not out of defiance, out of listening. She would tilt her head when no one spoke, stare at walls like they whispered back, press her palms to the stone, and wait. When asked what she was doing, she would only say, "I'm hearing the deep." Then, one morning, she didn't return. She had been seen walking near the forge's lower vents, where the earth cracked into veins of old tunnels and heat still bled through the floor. No alarms were triggered, no signs of a struggle. One moment she was there, then she was not. Search parties descended into the tunnels by the hour. Lights flickered against stone darkened by age and battle. Echoes played tricks. Vent shafts blew warm air that made armor hum. The deepest paths had no maps, just old marks scratched by workers long gone, symbols lost to time. They searched for 3 days. On the 4th, a child emerged from the deep. She was not dragged, not found huddled in shadow. She walked upright from a broken tunnel mouth, barefoot, her skin stained with dust and mineral sheen. Across her shoulders and chest were draped what looked like scale, thick, overlapping, iridescent. Not armor, not clothing. Something alive once, now clinging to her like memory. Tierna did not speak for hours. She was taken to the healers, her pulse steady, no wounds, no dehydration. But something in her eyes had shifted, as if her gaze looked through people, not at them. When she finally opened her mouth, it was not basic she spoke, nor Mandoa. It was older, a dialect even the eldest among the creed did not recognize. Deep vowels, harsh rhythm, chanted as if in ceremony. It wasn't madness, it was precise, repeated with clarity, with structure, a voice not her own, echoing through her like a song remembered from 1,000 lives before. The armorer brought her to the forge. They sat across from the coals, quiet. Tyrna spoke again, this time slowly. Her tone softened, her hands moving with the cadence. She drew symbols in the soot, curved, ancient, unlike any current script. One of them matched a mark found beneath the great dome, carved into the rootstone that once supported Sundari's center spire. A language not heard since before the domed cities were raised. A language of the beast. Later that evening, the sky shifted. Clouds parted in silence. Wind stilled. Above the forge, where no creatures had flown in years, a shadow crossed the moonlight. Wide, slow. No wings, but movement. A shape coiling through the air with impossible grace. It passed once, then vanished behind the cliffs. No alarm was raised. No weapon drawn. The Mythosaur had returned to the surface, but it did not come to conquer. The elders gathered that night beneath the stars, not to make decisions, only to observe. Tyrna stood among them, still silent, still wrapped in the scaled hide that no one could identify. She did not claim to be chosen. She claimed nothing at all. When asked what the Mythosaur wanted, she answered only, "It waits." No one challenged her. From that night forward, a vigil was kept outside the forge. One warrior, one foundling, each taking shifts, not guards, witnesses. Some nights nothing passed but wind. Others, the shadow returned, circling once, casting the coals below in dim blue shimmer before sliding back into the horizon. No one followed it. No one dared. The armorer began carving new symbols into the inner plates of armor, subtle, near the heart. Not clan marks, not sigils of rank, just shapes, echoes of the script Tyrna had drawn in ash. She did not explain their meaning, only said, "The deep is awake, and it listens." The creed held. The way continued. But now, when children asked about the Mythosaur, no one called it legend. They said it was watching, and that was enough.